Hi everyone, it's Ryan and Joe, and today we're going to talk about astrology, which you may find surprising since this is an astrology channel. You probably know what astrology is, but do you know what astrology actually is?
A lot of people just kind of assume astrology is an entertainment thing with just kind of made up definitions for different personality types. And from what you find online, it's totally understandable that you would. So sort of among all these non-definitions or kind of ambiguous definitions, there are a lot of actual ones that people try to propose, and this one is the one we like the most. Astrology is the study of the correlation between celestial movements and earthly events. So if that's what astrology is, there are plenty of things that astrology is not. And here are several of them. Oh, there's lots. Okay.
So a lot of times with these sort of more complex, or not more complex, like, what's the word for, like, out there?
I know what you're trying to say. It's like, when you're talking about something that's this, like, out there, like, outside the realm of things we can, like, nail down specifically, it makes it easier to grasp it when you talk about what it isn't. So that kind of...
Perfect. Yeah. Good job.
So here are some things that astrology isn't. Astrology is not an umbrella term for other new agey or metaphysical things like tarot or being psychic or numerology, things like that. Astrology is a distinct thing that studies the correlation of planetary movements and things that happen on Earth and things that happen with people.
Astrology excludes those things. Like, you don't need palmistry, numerology, whatever, to be an astrologer. What? I don't. I mean, you shouldn't.
You don't.
You shouldn't need those things.
It doesn't require them.
Okay, so like excludes.
Because it doesn't necessarily. Yeah. It doesn't really exclude them. A lot of people use them together.
Well, sure. So being an astrologer doesn't require you being, a tarot card reader or a palmist. Like, those are things that you can do, and they can work together, and many people do use them together. But you don't have to. Like, you can use astrology on its own, and you can do palmistry on its own, and never the two have to meet. That's fine.
Yeah. Another major thing that astrology is not is that it's not just being psychic or being intuitive or empathic or something. There are plenty of intuitive astrologers out there that do really great work, and they supplement their intuitive work with astrology or vice versa. However, it's really, really important to know that astrology has a really strong internal logic. You don't need psychic abilities to make astrology work. It's like you don't need psychic abilities to look at a map and read it and get somewhere. It's the same thing with astrology. You don't need intuition to read a map. You don't need intuition to read an astrology chart.
So another thing that's really hugely important about astrology is that it is not new. It is not something that was made up in the 1960s or 70s. It stretches back all the way to ancient Babylon. So we're talking like 3,000 years of history and development with this. It isn't something that people just dreamed up in their garage. That would be a trick. And this works in conjunction with like the strong internal logic that Joe was talking about. It's had this history of being practiced in different cultures at different times for different purposes that's carried on to the present day that you wouldn't really get a sense of if you just looked at astrology on the internet.
Right. Because the way we do astrology now, you could call it horoscopic astrology, actually started in like Hellenistic Greece. So like a long ass time ago, like way before you start seeing like horoscopes in the 30s or like astrology columnists writing about it now. Astrology is also not just your sign, like you're a Gemini or like you're a Libra. It's not just that. It's actually way
Lord,
bigger
we wish it was
that.
just that.
Oh God.
But it is much more complex.
So another thing astrology is not is cold reading. Astrology is not just having someone walk into a consultation with you and you looking at how they look and how they act and being like, oh, you must have these personality traits.
Right, so astrology is something that should operate without the person, if that makes sense. Like, without the person's presence.
The person just gives you context for what you read from a chart. Like, you calculate a thing and derive meaning from this chart. The person's life gives you context for like how exactly that works, but it's not like you're taking details that you already have from their life and making it fit the chart and being like, oh, this means this.
So you have this chart that is, separate from the person. You look at the chart and you study its placements and you get meaning from that and you tell the person about it. And you may not know exactly what it all means, but through talking with the person, you start to develop more of a sense of like specifically what the symbolism talks about, rather than just sort of throwing out.
Literally guessing.
Literally
making really good guesses. Like, astrology is not really good guesses.
No.
Unless you're a bad astrologer.
Unless you're a bad astrologer, then it can be really great guesses. Another really big thing is that astrology is not a science. That doesn't mean that astrology is not real or like not a thing. Astrology isn't something that is inherently scientific. There are people who can practice astrology with like a scientific frame of reference or through like application of scientific theories. This was actually really, really big in like the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah.
There was this really big push to make astrology more scientific or to test it out in more scientific ways. And this is where we got things like statistical analysis of charts and chart placements. There's also individuals who applied modern scientific theories to explain astrology. Like one of the big mysteries of astrology is how it works, like why it should work, things like that. We don't really know. But there are people who have done work and claimed that either it's something to do with gravity, like
quantum physics or like chaos theory. Yeah.
They have different ideas of how it should work, and that's astrology that's much more scientific. But if you approach astrology from, like me specifically, I approach astrology from a much more like divinatory spiritual like approach to it. So there's no real science involved in it other than like the math that's necessary to calculate like planetary positions or do specific techniques.
So like me personally, and almost every professional that I've talked to doesn't view astrology as a science because like you literally can't test it with the scientific method. And it's just something that you have to accept or just be really pissed about. But like, I mean, you can be, but it's a lot better to just understand that it's an observable phenomenon. You can observe it. You just can't test it scientifically as far as... Right, like you can't like repeat experiments in a lab for astrology. It's just impossible. But you can observe it. So what is it? So how does it work?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
That's
and
the truth.
fine. And that's fine. Some people don't think that's fine, and that's fine too. But it's something that can give you reservations about like exploring it further. I think that's something that everybody asks themselves is like, okay, this is astrology, and you like experience something like firsthand about astrology that makes it accurate. And it's like, okay, but why? Like, why is this accurate? How is this working? And it can be frustrating to not have anybody be able to give you that kind of answer. That's just the way the human experience works. We don't always have all the answers, unfortunately. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a better perspective on what astrology is and maybe a bit more understanding of the things that it isn't but sounds like or influences and touches upon. So if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section below and we'll get back to you.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.